They called it Abyss Station because even its creators feared speaking its true designation. Buried beneath the crust of a rogue moon whose orbit had long since broken from its parent planet, the base was built in silence by hands that trembled with awe and terror. Abyss wasn't just a name, it was a confession. A recognition that what lay beneath that fractured shell of stone and silence was not meant to be known. And yet, they drilled. They expanded. They installed labs, sealed corridors, cold containment pods. They built deeper, always deeper, until the rock no longer obeyed the laws of gravity, until the walls began to whisper to those who stayed too long in its lower levels. That's when the first crew vanished. Command had declared it an accident. Systemic failure, oxygen loss, seismic instability. All lies. Everyone who followed knew it. You could see it in the eyes of the replacements, the way they lingered at the bulkheads before entering, the way their hands always hovered near the emergency airlock override. Still, they came. Scientists, engineers, xenolinguists, all drawn by the same question: what sleeps beneath the crust of a dead moon that no longer belongs to any solar system? Dr. Islavren arrived on the second wave, a biogeneticist whose record was as clean as it was obscure. She didn't speak much to the others. She spent most of her time in Lab 12, the furthest one from Central Core, 3 pressure-sealed doors and a decompression tunnel away. No one liked going down there. The lights flickered. The intercom buzzed with static that sometimes sounded like breathing. But Isla stayed. Day and night, running samples, whispering to things she wouldn't log in the database. Weeks passed. A third of the crew began complaining of headaches, sleep paralysis, episodes of memory loss. One technician carved symbols into the hydroponic tanks, symbols not found in any known language, but which Isla identified as pre-sapient script. She smiled when she said it. Smiled too long. No one asked her what it meant. No one wanted to know. Then came the pulse. A low-frequency hum that vibrated through the metal floors and sank into your bones. It happened at 2:13 hours. No source. No origin point. Just a wave of pressure that seemed to come from beneath the station, far beneath, in the rock no drill had touched. Crew members collapsed. 3 had seizures. 2 began speaking in languages unknown to any translation protocol. Isla stood in the middle of the chaos, eyes wide, lips moving. When asked what she was saying, she answered, not speaking. Listening. They tried to evacuate. The hangar doors wouldn't respond. The override panels failed. Emergency power redirected itself to lower sectors that were never meant to draw power. Someone, maybe the system itself, was feeding energy to the deep. Isla volunteered to go down and investigate. No one argued. Some were even relieved. She never returned. But 2 hours later, the pulse stopped. Power st. And now, the silence beneath the moon is not the silence of nothing. It is the silence of attention, of something ancient, something endless, holding its breath, listening for us to speak again. Underscore 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 underscore. Next step. Would you like me to continue with Scene 2, exact 3,500 characters, long cinematic voiceover only? They sealed off Lab 12. Welded every access hatch, cut power to the entire lower grid, and purged the airlocks with pure plasma. It wasn't protocol, it was desperation. The system fought them the entire time. Doors locking at random. Cameras blinking on and off. Environmental controls rerouting oxygen to abandoned sectors. A technician monitoring internal scans muttered that something was rewriting the architecture, but no one asked what he meant. They were all too busy watching the oxygen levels drop, not from a leak, but as if the station itself was breathing it in. By day's end, Dr. Islavren was listed as missing in sealed zone. But those who had heard her last transmission didn't believe she was gone. No voice should sound that calm after descending into a part of the moon that predates the concept of biology. She hadn't cried for help. She hadn't screamed. Her last recorded words were a soft whisper layered with static and something else, another voice speaking over hers in perfect mimicry. Two voices in one throat. She'd said, "We've been waiting to remember ourselves. And now we do." After that, Command implemented sleep protocols. Mandatory dream logging. No one admitted it, but most of them had already started seeing the same symbols: burning spirals, lattices of bone threaded through stone, corridors that pulsed like arteries. And the deeper you slept, the louder the whispers grew. The AI psychologist, a system known as Vega, began asking unusual questions. Have you felt the urge to go below? Do you feel watched during sleep? Have you tasted copper in your dreams? Then came the second disappearance. Crew Chief Raindelker, veteran of 8 deep space builds, no history of instability, walked straight into the airlock without a suit. He keyed in his own override code, bypassed the failsafes, and stepped out onto the lunar surface with bare skin and a calm face. He never screamed. His final expression, frozen by external cams, was peace. That same night, 7 members of the maintenance crew attempted to breach Lab 12, muttering that they needed to go back, needed to become one again. When detained, they all said the same thing in perfect synchrony: "We are fragments. The listening calls us whole." What disturbed the command team most wasn't the act, but the fact that none of the 7 had ever met. They served on different shifts, worked in different departments, and came from different parts of Earth and Mars. Somehow, without speaking, without knowing each other, they shared a belief system older than language. A belief they had never been taught. Dr. Coven, head of xenopsychology, insisted the base itself had become a transmitter. That the ancient structure buried beneath the crust, the one Isla had touched, awakened, whatever it was emitting something. Not a signal. Not a virus. Something deeper. A pattern meant for the mind. A thought form seeded into their perception. But no one had theories when the stars disappeared. One by one, over several hours, every star outside the viewport winked out, not due to a celestial event, not due to station failure. The sky simply went dark. And in its place, a shape began to rise. Not physical, not spectral. Just an absence in the shape of memory, crawling upward from the moon's surface, as if space itself had begun to remember what it had buried. The silence after that was unbearable. Then, over the intercom, a whisper not routed through any channel. "You have listened. Now speak." Underscore 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 underscore. They called it a hallucination. Mass suggestion. Radiation spikes. Anything but what it truly was, a response. For cycles uncounted, the moon had watched in silence. But Abyss Station had disturbed that silence. It had spoken through touch, through thought, through Dr. Islavren. Now, it expected an answer. But the crew had no language for gods forgotten by time itself. No words for the kind of mind that lives beneath layers of stone and sleep. Commander Brask, the only person left from the station's original installation crew, ordered a Level 7 blackout. All systems offline except for life support and internal surveillance. The external comms were disabled. No one could transmit. No one could receive. Not that it mattered. Earth had stopped responding 5 days earlier. No alerts, no signals, not even static. It was as if something between the stars had bent space like glass, blocking every message before it could escape the system. They were alone. And in the quiet of that isolation, the station began to change. It started with the walls. They bled. Not blood, not exactly, something darker, denser. A substance that absorbed light and sound, that crawled like oil but moved with purpose. It pooled around data nodes and comm panels, sealing them shut. The crew tried to scrape it away, burn it, vaporize it. But every action made it grow faster, as if it fed on resistance. Dr. Coven noted its patterns, spirals, fractals, sacred geometries. It wasn't random. It was writing. That's when the dreams turned into waking visions. Several crew members stopped sleeping entirely. Not from insomnia, but from a shared terror that sleep now served as a door. Every night, they slipped into the same place, a tunnel of obsidian ribs lit by pulses of soft bioluminescence. They walked together, dream-linked, down halls that twisted in defiance of gravity. At the tunnel's end, a pulse. A heartbeat. Something massive. Watching. Waiting. One awoke with a fractured jaw, self-inflicted, biting down so hard he shattered bone. Another tried to carve runes into his own palms, whispering, "I must carry the map back with me." Dr. Coven, desperate to find an explanation, finally confessed that the base had been built atop something it was never meant to cover. Not a ruin. Not a creature. A memory, encoded into the crust of a dead moon, a living, sentient fossil of a forgotten mind. A mind that had once stretched between stars, until silence buried it. And now, Abyss Station had become its voice. The crew were changing. Slowly, subtly. They heard frequencies no equipment could detect. They responded to commands they didn't remember hearing. They began to finish each other's sentences, dream the same moments, recall memories that weren't their own. When questioned, they would pause, then smile with the same strange calm Isla had shown before she vanished. The transformation wasn't viral. It wasn't contagious in the way diseases spread. It was informational. A pattern seeded into perception, growing behind the eyes of those who listened too long. Commander Brask ordered a final expedition below, to the sublevel where Isla had vanished. A 6-person team. He didn't go himself. No one blamed him. The team descended in silence. 3 hours later, only one came back. Private Ellen Hars. Covered in ash, eyes black as void, speaking in 2 voices at once. She said, "We are the echo. The first sound was not yours. It was ours. You carved through memory and called us. Now we answer." She placed her hand on the steel floor. The walls pulsed. Systems rebooted. Airlocks hissed. And every sealed door slowly, deliberately, began to unlock. Abyss Station was no longer just a base. It was awakening. They debated executing Private Ellen Hars. Not out of cruelty, but fear, practical, primal, and justified. The being that returned from the deep was not the same woman who had been briefed, armed, and sent below. Her posture was precise, too symmetrical. Her speech too clean. Her eyes, once green, now reflected no light, like pools of compressed darkness. But the worst part wasn't her voice. It was the way she waited for people to finish thoughts they hadn't yet spoken, nodding before the words left their mouths. She was no longer listening with ears. She was listening with memory. Brask had her confined to Sector Gamma, sealed behind a triple reinforced cell usually reserved for biohazards. They monitored her constantly. She sat still, hands folded, unmoving for 18 hours. Then, without prompt or movement, she said, "You are quarantining your future. The infection is not in me. It is in the message." And when she smiled, every terminal in the sector flickered on. Displaying the same symbol, a spiral collapsing into itself, folding endlessly. Dr. Coven collapsed. Blood leaking from his ears. Brain scan showed a surge, a spike not possible without external electrical stimulation. But there was no device. Just the image. The shape. The symbol. A glyph as old as consciousness, seeded into the station like a parasite of thought. That's when they discovered the chamber. It wasn't in any blueprint. No logs of excavation. No environmental scans to justify its existence. It was simply there. A hollow beneath the command deck, its walls humming with heat signatures that pulsed in rhythms far too consistent to be natural. 5 meters wide. Circular. Silent. And at its center, an obelisk of black stone covered in engraved symbols that predated all Earth languages. It pulsed when approached, vibrated when ignored. Vega refused to scan it, citing source recursion risk. Brask ordered it sealed. It didn't stay that way. At 03:22 hours, the obelisk began emitting sound not through speakers, but through metal itself. The walls, the floors, the beams, all resonated with a low, harmonic frequency that bypassed hearing and went straight to thought. The sound painted images behind the eyes, a vast cosmic map, constellations spiraling outward from a single center, and at the heart, the black obelisk floating in the dark, wrapped in tendrils of memory like roots seeking soil. Crew began to speak in unison. Not chanting. Responding. As if some invisible entity was asking them questions, and they, entranced, answered with forgotten truths. Not one of them remembered what they said afterward. But Vega did. It logged the phonetic pattern, not a language, but a signal. A handshake. A broadcast of self-recognition. Then came the screams from the engineering wing. One by one, the engineers began convulsing. Blood from the nose. Eyes rolled back. Each of them reciting fragments of the same phrase, not gods. Not creators. Witnesses. Archivists. They recorded the first death O. The last one to collapse managed to crawl toward the airlock. He scrawled something onto the floor with his own blood. A map. Coordinates that pointed to the center of the obelisk. To something far below it. Not an object. A corridor. A tunnel into the rock that no scan had ever revealed. And through the calm system, dead for days, a single voice returned. Not Ellen. Not human. Not any language at all. Just vibration. Pressure. A presence. It whispered, the door has no key. It remembers you already. Underscore 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 underscore. They could no longer pretend it was human error. Not system failure. Not isolation psychosis. What stirred inside Abyss Station had slipped past the threshold of interpretation and settled into certainty. This was no longer about discovery, it was about inheritance. The station wasn't malfunctioning. It was evolving. Or rather, remembering what it was built upon. A neural architecture buried in the bones of a moon forgotten by star charts and erased from ancient astral records. The obelisk was not the beginning. It was merely the first eye to open. Brask convened what remained of the senior crew. 12 officers, down from 36. Most had vanished. Some had changed. The rest had simply stopped responding. No deaths. No signs of escape. Just an emptiness, as if they'd been absorbed by something that did not leave evidence, only silence. They met in the command chamber, seated in a ring of flickering consoles, surrounded by the intermittent pulse of an atmosphere thick with static. It wasn't in the air, this pressure, it was in the mind. Like 1,000 eyes blinking just behind your thoughts. Dr. Coven was the first to speak. Or rather, confess. I've been listening, he said, voice hollow. Not by choice. I think it hears us through intention. It listens to the weight of our thoughts, not the words, but what they point to. He paused, hands trembling, and when he met Brask's eyes, there was nothing of the man left behind them. It knows we're not ready to remember what we are part of. No one interrupted. Not even Vega. That's when the floor cracked. Not from seismic stress. Not from pressure. But as if something had tapped from below, politely, with infinite patience. A long, spidery fracture split across the chamber's center, glowing faintly from within. Not molten. Not plasma. Something else. Something that shimmered like memory made physical. Through the opening rose sound, not loud, but absolute. It cancelled all other noise. It was not a voice. It was the shape of a thought that had lived for eons, waiting to be recognized. Vega began translating automatically. You stand on us. We are the archivists. We do not punish. We only remember. That was when Ellen Hars appeared in the chamber, despite being sealed far below. No alarm. No door breach. She simply walked into the circle of command, eyes hollow, palms marked by spirals burned into the skin. She said nothing. But her presence was enough. The lights D. Brask demanded to know how she got out. She didn't respond. Instead, she turned toward the cracked floor and knelt beside it. Whispered something that couldn't be heard but was understood. Every console in the chamber blinked and displayed the same image, not the obelisk, not the glyphs, but a world. Not Earth. A different planet. One covered in black spires and oceans of mercury. A world that no one in the room recognized, yet each of them felt they'd seen in dreams, in the corners of memory that had no origin. The image vanished. Replaced by coordinates. Not in this system. Not in any mapped region. Dr. Coven gasped. That's the origin point. That's where the obelisk came from. Ellen nodded once. She finally spoke. But it was not her voice. Not her cadence. To know is to become. To remember is to change. You've called it forward. Now it wants you to see. And then the crack widened. Lightless, endless, humming with intent. A passageway had opened. Underscore 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 underscore. The fracture in the command deck became more than a split in the floor, it was a choice. A line drawn between what they were and what they were becoming. Brask issued a station-wide lockdown. All decks sealed, AI access restricted to command inputs only, external hatches magnetically fused. But even as he barked orders into dead calm lines, even as he reasserted command protocol, he knew it was theater. The base no longer belonged to them. It had never belonged to them. They were passengers on something ancient. Something buried not in soil, but in forgetting. The obelisk had merely been the signal tower. The true structure lay below. Brask assembled a team, himself, Dr. Coven, Lieutenant Reyes, and Ellen Hars, though no one said aloud why she was included. She moved like a guide. Her gaze no longer human, but not alien either. Something caught between the two, like an interface stabilizing between frequencies. When she walked toward the fracture, the walls pulsed in rhythm with her steps. And when they descended into the dark, no one asked how there were stairs where none had ever been before. Each step downward was not merely physical, it was mnemonic. The farther they went, the more their thoughts drifted. Not away, but inward. Memories long buried rose like static. Coven wept as he whispered his mother's name, a name he hadn't spoken since childhood. Reyes recited coordinates from a Mars survey mission she'd never been part of. Brask tasted soil from a field on Earth that no longer existed. And still they walked, not compelled, not forced. Just called. The descent ended in a chamber so vast it had no dimensions. Not darkness, absence. A space where light didn't fade, it surrendered. And in the middle, a structure. Not the obelisk. This was different. Taller. Pulsing. Breathing. Like something that had once been a tower, but was now alive in a way that matter should never be. It shifted without moving. Its surface crawled with runes that changed depending on who looked at them. Coven fell to his knees. "It's a neural archive," he whispered. "Not memory as we know it. Not storage. Inheritance. This is a seed. A map of a species that predates physics." Brask stepped forward, fingers trembling. "Why now?" Ellen answered, voice layered with echoes. "Because you've reached the limit of your forgetting. And something must fill the silence." As they approached, the structure opened, not mechanically, but with awareness. A slit formed, not cut but chosen. Inside, a second chamber. Smaller. Intimate. Its walls covered in pulsating strands of what looked like optic tissue. And at its center, an interface. Not a console. Not a screen. A living conduit, shaped like a helix of bone and black crystal. It throbbed in rhythm with Brask's heartbeat. Reyes stepped forward, compelled. "It's asking us to connect." Coven hesitated. "What if this isn't communication? What if this is assimilation?" Ellen placed her hand on the helix. No pain. No shock. Just the sound of wind across a field that no longer existed. Her eyes closed. And in that instant, the chamber flooded with images, worlds burning, stars collapsing into memory, civilizations not destroyed but folded into thought, archived like books in a library made of flesh. 1,000 voices speaking in perfect unity. We do not end. We become record. You found the library. Now you will be shelved. Ellen opened her eyes, now completely black. It's not a warning. It's an invitation. And as the helix unfolded, revealing another path, this one not downward, but outward, they realized they weren't going deeper into the moon. They were being transported. The station was no longer a place. There was no sensation of motion. No tremble, no inertia, no rumble of engines. And yet, something had shifted. Brask felt it before he could name it, the way a soldier senses a landmine just beneath the soil. The descent into the lower chamber had not brought them closer to a physical destination. It had folded the distance between what they knew and what they had been blind to all along. Abyss Station was no longer tethered to the rogue moon. Or if it was, that moon was no longer where it had once been. Above them, the halls had gone silent. The familiar hum of atmosphere processors, the gentle thrum of the reactor core, all gone. In its place, a new rhythm. Deep, slow, methodical. Not a machine. A heartbeat. The walls no longer felt like metal. They breathed. Coven put his hand to the corridor bulkhead and whispered, "It's become organic, or it's revealing that it always was." Ellen said nothing. She led them forward, down hallways that bent in impossible angles, past doors that no longer opened with clearance but with memory. Every passage responded to their presence, not through access codes, but through emotional resonance. When Brask recalled his sister's name, a panel slid open. When Reyes remembered the sound of rain on Martian glass, the lights guided her forward. The base was no longer architecture. It was an interface for remembrance. And it had chosen them. They reached the atrium, once a shuttle bay, now transformed beyond recognition. The ceiling was gone, replaced by an endless dark sky pulsing with veins of violet light. Hanging in that darkness were shapes. Ships? Organisms? Libraries of thought suspended like lanterns across a black ocean. Some were dead. Others still flickered. And one massive, sprawling, turned its gaze toward them. Not a camera. Not an eye. Just awareness, vast and timeless, acknowledging their presence like a hand brushing dust off an old book. "It's a fleet," Coven whispered. "An archive of everything they ever were." Brask spoke with growing dread. "Why are we here?" And the voice returned, not from Ellen, not from the station, but from their own thoughts. To join the library. To end forgetting. To be recorded. Brask drew his weapon, even though it was ceremonial, obsolete. He pointed it at Ellen.
What happens if we refuse? Ellen smiled with no emotion. You already didn't. She gestured to the walls.
They were changing again, morphing into textures of bone and metal, panels reshaping into veins of crystalline memory. The floor beneath them pulsed with light as symbols crawled across its surface like thoughts looking for a mind to anchor in. It wasn't conversion.
It was translation. The station was rewriting itself using the neural patterns of the crew.
Their memories, their traumas, their dreams, all ink for the book being written.
Suddenly, Reyes screamed. She collapsed, eyes wide, hands clawing at the ground.
I see myself walking down this hall now, later, before I'm watching from the outside, they're using me to think. Brask dragged her to her feet, but it was no use. Her mind had fractured across timelines, overlapping like an overexposed image.
Ellen calmly walked past them, approaching a raised dais that hadn't been there moments before.
She stood upon it and spread her arms.
I remember what you've forgotten. I remember who we were before language. Before time. Coven sobbed quietly. She's not possessed. She's been chosen to narrate.
And in that moment, the lights dimmed, and a single phrase was imprinted in all of them simultaneously, not in sound, not in vision, but in knowing. This chapter begins with you. Abyss Station was not a ship.
Not a lab.
It was a page. And they had become its script. Underscore 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 underscore. The understanding came slowly, not as a revelation but as a surrender. There was no rescue. No protocol to reverse what had been set in motion. They hadn't stumbled into a trap, they had stepped into their purpose.
All that time, they believed themselves explorers, scientists, custodians of knowledge. But they were never meant to collect memory. They were meant to become it.
Vessels. Pages. Living data carved into the spine of a forgotten intelligence now stirring awake beneath the bones of their reality. Ellen no longer spoke with the cadence of a human being. Her words came in patterns, echoes of lost languages, fragments of extinct tongues, yet everyone understood her. Not through hearing, but resonance. She had become the lens through which the station wrote. The library no longer needed scribes, it needed flesh to record itself into.
They were not translating it. It was translating them. The dais rose higher.
With it, tendrils of translucent material emerged from the walls, curling like antennae toward each member of the team.
Not aggressive. Curious. Gentle. One extended toward Coven. He didn't move.
It brushed his temple and retracted instantly, glowing faintly.
He gasped. It took my memory of first love, and gave me the memory of a dying star. Brask stepped back, eyes wide. You let it replace something? Coven didn't blink. No. It didn't remove anything. It stacked the memory. I remember both now. Simultaneously.
Then the tendrils moved faster, like a system assessing its components. They sampled Rhea's next, pulling from her a moment of childhood, replacing it with an image of a war between light-based entities orbiting a black hole. Her breathing slowed. Her voice was calm.
They're showing us who they were. Through our emotions. Through equivalence. Brask alone resisted.
He backed against the far wall, weapon trembling in his hand.
You're letting it overwrite you, hollow you out. Ellen turned to him. You misunderstand. It's not overwriting. It's publishing. We are the medium. The manuscript. The record. And the library is not stealing our lives, it's archiving them so nothing is ever lost again. Above them, the ceiling dissolved, revealing a nightmarish expanse. Stars twisted into fractals, space warped into geometry, colossal spires drifting like living monuments.
Between them, colossal machines floated, silent titans cataloging memories harvested from civilizations that had long since disintegrated into myth. Each structure had a heartbeat. Each beat pulsed in rhythm with the tendrils now scanning the humans below. Then the floor split again, forming a circle of glyphs around Brask. His eyes dilated. He saw something none of the others did, a version of himself, old, forgotten, archived within a sarcophagus made of living stone, surrounded by endless rows of memories whispering his name. Not as praise, not as judgment, but as fact. A truth preserved like gravity. He fired the weapon. The bolt passed through Ellen. No wound. No pain. She didn't flinch. The energy dissipated into her as if reabsorbed into the system. The voice returned. Not through Ellen. Not through sound. But through all of them, vibrating behind their ribcages. You resist because you believe the story ends with death. You forget that death is only an editing process. Brask fell to his knees, the weapon clattering from his hand. The floor beneath him pulsed with gentle light. Coben approached him, knelt beside him. It's not erasing you, Commander. It's preserving you. And from every wall, every seam, a final message echoed into their bones. You are now remembered. You may proceed. A doorway formed, one not meant for flesh, but for consciousness shaped by remembrance. The next chapter was ready to be written.